and welcoming you in, or saying have a nice day, or saying you can or cannot go, but they've expressed or passed that authority on to their representatives, such as general managers or store managers or assistant managers and so forth, and they are able to carry out or enforce those rules on behalf of the owner of that property. So anywhere they go for the rest of their life, even after they get out of fifth grade, I can't wait till I'm 16 and I've got a driver's license and I can do whatever I want to do. No, you can't do whatever you want to do. You go 65 in a school zone, you're going to find out right away you can't do whatever you want to do. Okay, but rules are not there to create a burden for us. And like we covered in the last lesson, those rules that are set by the authority are there to help keep us safe. Okay, remember, the authority has understanding, they have knowledge, they have experience in things that we, as a child, a 10-year-old, they wouldn't have that type of knowledge and experience. So whether they realize it or not, they kind of have to rely and depend on the authority to guide them, even if they didn't ask for it, but to guide them in the proper way so that they can make decisions that won't bring harm to themselves or others. Okay, so that's why obeying the authority, as we saw in the last lesson, there is a part of self-control. Now, it requires self-control on the part of the child or the student in order to obey. That's when they're obeying. When they're practicing self-control, they're obeying. When they're disobeying, well, they're not practicing self-control. And as we saw in the scenario, the narrative, oh, Freddie, that's right, Freddie goes camping. Freddie suffered some consequences, suffered quite a few consequences. You think after the first and the second and the third and the fourth or the fifth and sixth time that he would kind of get it in his mind, well, maybe I should listen to grandfather. He probably knows a little bit more than I do. I should take his advice, okay? But he didn't. And sometimes some people's minds are kind of their heads are a hard nut to crack. but over time, and sometimes sadly it's through experience, you can get through it and help them to see and understand that what you as the authority, whether it's a teacher or a parent or a counselor, or administrator, are doing is trying to help them. You're looking out for their best interests. So, we do want to develop a trust in the minds, in the eyes of our students. We don't want to tell them not to be doing something, not to be breaking the rules, and then when we don't think nobody's in the classroom, here we are breaking the rules, right? They're kind of not going to really believe us, you see. And it can't be a do as I say, don't question anything I do type of attitude. Remember, as teachers, we set in the perfect position to role model appropriate behavior for our students to follow. Because I guarantee you, they're going to be checking you to see if you're following what you're telling them to do. And as soon as you step out of line, they're going to point it out to you. And hopefully, if that does occur, and, we're humans, we do slip up and make mistakes sometimes. We could be humble enough to acknowledge their remembrance of the rules, them remembering it, and thanking them for pointing it out to us, right? Because as teachers, we can make mistakes sometimes, and when something's pointed out to us, we shouldn't get the haughty, oh, well, you don't need to tell me what to do. I'm the teacher. You just need to make sure you follow in those rules. No. Hey, wow, man, you know what I did? I sure did. I slipped up. That's exactly opposite of what I've been teaching. Man, I really appreciate you pointing that out to me. I'll keep my eye open for that in the future, And that teaches them to be humble. That teaches them to, oh, you know what? If we do make a mistake, there's a way that we can fix it because we're telling them the same thing, right? So sometimes there are mistakes that are made. Sometimes there are toes that get stepped on. Sometimes there are offenses that are had. Well, as we go through this lesson here, we're going to have to see how the student will continue in practicing self-control and applying this character trait of self-control in dealing with conflict. So let's look over to page 191 here as we move forward. 191, and this is entitled Dealing with Conflict, Lesson 3, Dealing with Conflict. And the purpose and objective of this lesson will be students will learn the proper way to use self-control when dealing with a conflict. And of course, the materials here will have students' workbook is pretty much all you need. And the procedure is number 1, procedure 1. So obviously, review previous lesson, obeying authority as part of self-control, and remind students that rules and guidelines govern every aspect of their lives. Those in authority set rules for their safety, well-being, and well-being. When they choose to obey, they practice self-control. And that's, again, something you could take a few answers from your students and ask, who can give me some examples, because we went through this before in the previous lesson, but to bring it back up fresh in their mind, who could give me some examples of a person in authority or an authority and an example of a rule that they might set to keep us safe, right? Or to guide us in a particular thing. It's like sometimes you'll see, like in some of these, some of the coastal states, they have hurricane evacuation routes, and the state or the county or the city, I'm not sure who's over dealing with the roads and so forth, might be the state. When it's certain weather emergencies, they can divert the flow of traffic using a hurricane route, and an interstate that might have 4 lanes going east and 4 lanes going west can now have 8 lanes going west, right? So that everybody that's on, let's say, example, the East Coast, they can use that highway, that interstate to, have a greater flow of traffic so that everybody can get out in a timely manner. Well, the government sets that rule that, hey, all traffic is going to be flowing in a westerly pattern. If you have to go east for any reason, do not take the interstate. Well, what's going to occur if someone decides, well, the interstate's faster? I'm going to beat the rush because there's not going to be anybody going in town. They're going to run into a wall of traffic because you're right. Everybody's going to be heading out of town, but they're going to be heading out of town on the road that should be traveling east. So if one person, sometimes all it takes is one person to not follow the rules, to not uphold the guidelines, and it could cause, mass conflicts, mass chaos for tens, hundreds, maybe even thousands of people. You look at these examples where people go to these parks, and the park has rules. You see it ever so often. It's a lot more in the news now than it was previously, but you usually get a report on it every summertime or something. Somebody in Yellowstone Park or one of these national parks, where the wildlife run free. And, the park sets rules. Stay on the paths. Don't leave the paths. Don't approach the animals. Don't try to pet the animals. Don't try to feed the animals. Don't go off the path into these where they have like these hot springs, and the geysers and so forth. And every year, somebody wants to get the perfect picture, just the perfect shot that I can put this on my Instagram profile, living the life, And they take their shoes off and they walk in these hot springs and they burn their skin on their feet, or they get too close and a bear or a buffalo or an elk or a moose, right? A mother moose starts charging after them because the mothers are pretty protective of their young. You might not see the young there, but they'll charge you. And the moose are, they're not meese. More than one moose is not a meese, right? It's still a moose, right? Mooses, what do you call more than one moose? Moose, I guess they're all still moose. One moose, mice. Well, anyway, they can run pretty quick. You're not going to outrun a moose. You're not going to outrun a bear. Obviously, as we've seen, you're not going to outrun a buffalo either. a bison or a crocodile, right? You know, these animals are pretty fast, and the park sets the rules for a reason, so that, you know, your encounter with these animals and your trip for that day or however long you're going to be there, it could be as safe as possible. Now, you can't control what the animals decide to do on their own, but these things are set to so that you can be proactive and not putting yourself or your family or others in a dangerous situation. So again, those rules, the authority are the ones who set the rules, and they do so for the safety and well-being. And of course, when they choose to obey, they practice self-control. And I like to always remind my students to say, look, the one power you have is the power to choose. No one can take that from you. When you gather the facts and you get the information, which is something that, you know, they should be doing, they should be asking questions. Remember, like we went in the previous lesson, ask the proper authority. Ask the person who has the experience. Don't ask your neighbor over here who's, you know, the same age as you or 6 months older than you, and you think he's got 6 months more experience than you do, you know. You have to ask the proper authority, because they can guide you and tell you what you need to do or what you need to not do or to avoid. All right, so procedure 2 here, we're on page 191. Ask students what self-control is. Right? You want to get an idea from them, kind of in their own words, and they should have grasped some information from the previous 2 lessons here that they covered as to what self-control is, but get them to see what they're retaining, you know, and if they're not remembering, well, you know, you might have to rehearse a little bit more. We're not looking for a picture-perfect definition, but just that they understand the concept. And because we go over the definitions enough in these lessons to put it in their mind. The main thing is you want them to understand what the concept of self-control, because when they understand it in their mind, then they can apply it a lot easier. So remind students that self-control is the ability to stop, think, consider the options, and proceed to the right choice. Okay? Now, when you think about it, 10 years old, 9, 10, 11, somewhere around there, they have that ability. They have that ability. They're at the point of time in their life where they, through communication, proper communication, now the authority plays a part in this as well, right? They have to be able to communicate the instructions, the guidelines, the rules to the student or the child in a manner in which they can receive them, right? And in a way that they are receptive to them, right? You know, sometimes children, if you start, you know, yelling and screaming at them and threatening them and you know, just being wild, you know, a tyrant towards them, they shut down. You know, they shut down. And it's not that they don't want to listen to you. They're kind of in a panic mode, a fight or flight mode, and they shut down. And their mind, their body is in a kind of protective state. So, and I guess this might be where Charlie Brown got it from. You know, when the teacher or a person's acting that way towards them, all they hear is wah 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 wah. You know, because they're in a protective mode. So, you know, if there has been, you know, an offense that has been made, and sometimes there might be frustration on the part of the teacher or the parent or whatever the case, take a little bit of time, calm down, and then come back and deal with it in an appropriate way, because you want them to be able to receive the information, be receptive of the information. And if they're so afraid, right, that part of their mind might shut down and they won't remember as much, because they're only going to be thinking about what they need to do to keep themselves safe or keep themselves out of harm's way. Okay, so it's a two-way street when it comes to this communication, and you want to remind them that they have the ability. Right now, 10 years old, yep, you have the ability. You can listen to the instructions, you can follow the instructions, You can ask questions if you don't understand the instructions, and then you can put those instructions into practice. Okay, now a 6 month old, a 1 year old or whatever, they're not going to have that ability. They're crying because they're hungry or they're thirsty or they're hot or they got a dirty diaper and they're screaming. You can't go to a 6 month old and say, you need to stop crying, practice self control here. I'm trying to watch my soap operas, for heaven's sakes. They don't have the ability to do that. They just don't. Okay, they haven't developed that part of their brain where they can receive information and make choices based on the options that are before them. And so as they get to this age, we want to let them know, hey, look, you're becoming, big girls, big boys. You're getting older. One day you're going to be a teenager, and then you're going to be an adult. So the habits that you develop now and showing that you can practice self-control is going to help you to do it easier when you're an adult. If you are in a habit of controlling the way you think, feel, and act now, when you become adult, you're already going to have that habit as a part of you, right? It's a practice that's already going to be within you. People who don't learn that, to develop that when they're children, not to say that they can't. Anybody can learn anything at any time. But they're going to have a harder time because now they've got to change directions, right? And if you know anything about physics, the majority of the energy goes into starting or stopping something, right? The change of inertia. You can G forces, for airplane pilots and rockets and so forth. Even in your car, there's a certain amount of G forces that you're now. I don't think in a Ford Festiva you're pulling any G forces, but most cars that that have any type of horsepower, you can pull some G's off the line. But it's that change in inertia, right? The energy that's put into getting something started that requires the most amount of force. This is why starting a new habit is so difficult. We're not lifting a physical weight, but in our mind, it is a weight. It's a change. It's something that our subconscious mind is not used to. So it takes a lot more energy and a lot more effort and a lot more time to start a new habit. But we can't forget, it's not just starting that new habit. We've also got to pump the brakes on the old habit. This is why truck drivers, I hear a lot of the truck drivers that long road over the the big semis and everything, they say, when they're going through towns, they hate stopping. They love it when they can catch all the green lights because it takes so much, initiative to get that 80,000-pound big rig, going. Well, nowadays they have automatics anymore, but I mean, still, it takes a lot to get that thing rolling, and all that starting also requires more fuel. So if they can start to develop these habits now, they're going to have an easier time when they get older. And so it's the ability which they have, and kind of remind them, yes, you do, you can develop any habit, any ability, any skill, any character trait that you want. To stop, think, consider the options, and proceed to the right choice. A right choice, remind them again, means you won't hurt yourself, others, or property. Or maybe not hurt property per se, but damage property, right? You can hurt property that belongs to people in regards to things like animals and so forth. You can hurt the environment as well because it's a living thing, but you can also damage property through vandalism and so forth. And then procedure 3 here tells students that today they will learn how to apply self-control when they are in a situation that causes conflict. So what it is, self-control, right? Now how to apply it. Okay, so they're getting a nice foundation laid for them. Ask students what a conflict is. And, of course, take as many answers as time permits. And then read to them here. It says a problem or disagreement between two or more people. And then procedure 4 says stress to students that if they get angry, that is not wrong. All right? There's a lot of focus on, you know, angry is, you know, it's a bad thing. It's a bad thing that a person gets angry, you know? And as we're going to learn here, this is, of course, a natural emotion. It's a natural emotion. Anger is a natural emotion. Joy is a natural emotion. Sadness is a natural emotion. Excitement is a natural emotion, you know. But as we're going to learn, it's what they do with these emotions, how they use them. If they practice self-control or not with these emotions, that's going to determine the outcome and their experiences in life, whether they're positive or negative. When they are in a conflict, it helps to remember these 3 don'ts to help solve the conflict. A, do not do anything that will hurt yourself. So, you know, and I've seen growing up, I've seen people, children, this was when I was in like elementary school, and I don't think I saw it in junior high, but, you know, definitely elementary school and maybe some in junior high, you know. You know, when people got upset, children got upset, you know, they would do things like slam their hands on the desk or punch lockers or punch walls or bang their head against things like that, you know, the walls and lockers. And, you know, sometimes they'd hurt themselves pretty bad. You know, they'd punch a wall or something until their knuckles bled or, you know, heavens forbid, broke a finger or something. You know, you can't do things to hurt yourself, okay? We understand you're angry, and you want to remind them it's okay. It's all right to be angry. But we have to deal with this anger in a positive way. We can't let anger control us. We can't let any emotion control us. All emotion does is tell us how we feel about a particular thing. B, do not do anything that will hurt another person. Right? So you definitely don't want to hurt yourself. Remember when we talked about respect? Treat others the way you want to be treated. And this is why I say if a person doesn't mind hurting themselves or being disrespectful to themselves, they won't mind being disrespectful or hurting others. So we have to be mindful of how we treat ourselves, and we have to be mindful of how we treat others. And then C, do not destroy anything. Okay, do not destroy anything. And it doesn't matter if it's yours. You still have to practice self-control even with your own belongings. Because I've seen situations where people got upset about something and they threw it on the ground or they kicked it. And then after they calmed down, they're like, oh, man, I wanted to listen to one of my CDs, but I threw my CD player against the wall, or I kicked it down the stairs or something when I was angry. Well, why'd you do that? I don't know. I just was frustrated, you know? Well, remember what we covered in the intermediate series? That's called displacement. That's an anger style. You know, you've got withdraw, attack, and displacement. Withdraw is just, people become quiet, right? They become quiet. They become, they deal with their emotions and they internalize everything, right? That's not a positive thing either, because those emotions, remember what we said when a person is dealing with anger, the type of thoughts that they have? Hot thoughts, right? Now you take heat and you cap it off and you don't, allow that temperature, pressure follows temperature, and so forth. Temperature follows pressure, pressure follows temperature. That heat builds up, and there's no way for that pressure to relieve. Eventually, someone's going to potentially snap. Sometimes people do that, I don't know, Your Honor. I just, all these things were I was just, what do they say, bottling up all these emotions. I was just holding all these things in. Didn't talk to anybody. And sometimes children are like that. You wouldn't think so in today's day and age, but a 10-year-old, a 6-year-old, a 12-year-old, a 13-year-old, sometimes they are in a very dysfunctional family, a very difficult environment to deal with. And part of the mindset of the family is, We don't call the outside authorities to deal. We deal with our problems in house. We don't ask for help. But it's a whirlwind of disaster inside that house. So there's no outlet. There's nowhere for a person like a child who doesn't know how to process and deal with all these emotions and things being thrown at them all the time. And sometimes you might see these types of behaviors being displayed in the school, attack, right, or displacement and so forth, because they're frustrated. Now, as a teacher, you might not necessarily be in your position to deal with that. You might have to recommend them to the guidance counselor or someone who's in that position to help them to work through those problems. But these might be the causes of some of these things, and these behaviors might be a result of some of the things that are taking place in the home, or sometimes it could be taking place in the school too in the form of bullying. But we want to remind them here of these three don'ts. Don't do anything. Do not do anything that will hurt yourself. Don't do anything that will hurt another person, and don't do anything. Don't destroy anything, right? And of course, this will also keep them safe as well, because there's consequences to all of these three things if they're not followed. Now, procedure 5, it says, ask the class what occurs when there is conflict in their lives, and how do they feel? What are they thinking? Have students answer the following questions. Okay, so we have 4 points here. What occurs when there are conflicts in their lives? How do they feel? What are they thinking? I guess that's 3. And then have students answer the following questions. A, did they get mad when the conflict started? Now, you're going to get various answers because you're going to have various examples of different conflicts being presented to you by the student, okay? But you just want to get them to start thinking about their emotions when these things arose. So A, did they get mad? Okay. How did they feel? B, did they want to hit someone? Did they want to hit someone? Or C, did they want to destroy something? Okay, C, A, B, or C. How did they get mad when the conflict started? Did they want to hit someone, or did they want to destroy something? Okay, and just get an idea from them of how they felt. How did they respond to those particular conflicts and the examples that were given? Now, sometimes people might have that thought or have that desire in their mind, but they don't actually do it. And I think all of us have had fleeting thoughts in our mind in bouts of frustration or anger or something like that, where we might have wanted to retaliate in a certain way or respond in a negative way, but we didn't do it. Okay, but we at least need to acknowledge that we did have that thought that came into our mind, and then we need to work on replacing those types of things with positive thoughts, and instructing and guiding them as well. So look at procedure 6 here on page 192. It says, explain to students that the above actions are common ways some people react when dealing with a conflict. Tell students that they must learn self-control so they won't hurt themselves or others. They should practice self-control by using the following steps. So here we get into the STOP acronym, which will reiterate all throughout the remainder of the different series: intermediate, advanced, workplace, parenting, and so forth. So we have STOP, okay, and you could write this on the board, the STOP acronym, or have something made, or have maybe, some sticky letters where, somebody can come up and put the S up on the board or something. You can kind of make it an interactive activity for your students. And you can be a little creative with it and follow the lesson as well. Stop, because they remember things, they retain things more when they participate in them. Okay. So S, stop and consider What is causing the conflict? What is it? What is it that when they feel a certain way, right? Why are they feeling that way? What's taking place in their environment that's got them to feeling a certain way or thinking a certain way, which is the first thing that leads to the feeling. Did someone say something? Did someone not say something? Did someone do something? Was something not there when you expected it to be there? Was there embarrassment? Did someone, bump your walk by you and bump your desk while you were trying to do your handwriting lesson, and now you're writing in pen, you know, and now you got to try to fix this now, so get them to thinking, and this is the whole purpose of this is to start helping them to develop a process of analyzing, right? Analyzing their thought process that's leading them to feel and maybe want to act in a certain way, critically, right? We talked about in the last class, I think I did, talked about critical thinking, right? Which is a skill that has to be developed. It's not necessarily innate. So that's S. Now T is think about, think. So stop, S, stop, T, think. Think about what you can do to resolve the conflict. So now that they've acknowledged what it is that is causing the conflict to begin with, we're going to totally eliminate any types of hot thoughts or negative retaliatory thoughts or anything like that. Now we're going to go right towards resolution because we want to accentuate the positive. We want to get their minds locked in a program of right away, let's find a solution. Let's find a way to resolve the problem. Not, all right, I'll meet you in the parking lot at 3 o'clock after school. And then you fight, and then, you shake hands afterwards. Or teacher's character. You teach these boys, how to be a man. They know some skills, some street fighting skills, and they'll be able to survive in the real world. No, we want them to be problem solvers. Even problem eliminators if possible, to stop a problem before it arises, or stop a conflict before it arises. But at least if something does, then their mindset is going to be towards resolution first thing. So that's T. Then O is, what are the options? So O is for options. What are the options to solve the conflict peacefully? So what can be done to resolve it? Then what are some options that I can use to do it in a peaceful manner? Now that's very important. You can't skip that whole line in the O part with options, because a person that's not trained in the peaceful solution would say, well, I can just punch him right in the face, and that'll solve the problem for me. I don't have to hear him talk no more. No, that's not an option. Why? Why doesn't it fit with the O, the line in O? Because the key word here is peacefully. How can you resolve the problem, the conflict, peacefully? So they can't skip over that, because that's going to help them, because certain training in certain environments that people grow up in, that's a normal way of life. Somebody mouths off, somebody says something wrong, or I get upset as a result of it, and boop, pop right in the mouth, or whatever they do, some sort of lashing out or attack or whatever, even if it's verbal, right? The verbal words sometimes hit just as hard as the fist. But no, we want them to start looking at, okay, well, what can we do to solve it? And what are some options that I can use to bring about a peaceful resolution to this conflict? And then lastly here, the P is proceed. So proceed to carry out the right option to solve the conflict. So it's not enough just to examine yourself or examine the conflict and say, okay, what's causing it, right? What's causing it? I want to resolve it. What are my options? Okay, these are my options. All right. Okay. I like those options. Well, it's lunchtime. Now you got to put it into practice. That's the only way it's going to work is now they have to put it into practice. And sometimes they might be stuck on how to put certain things into practice. So remind them, hey, listen, if you do have a conflict and you want to solve it and you've come up with some options, but you might not necessarily know how to apply them, come and talk to me, right? Reach out to me. Reach out to me as your teacher or another teacher or the guidance counselor. So, whoever, say this is a problem. This is what I'm dealing with. I'm wanting to resolve it. These are my thoughts. How should I go about dealing with it? And that way they can have more resources and backing, to say, wow, you're thinking peacefully. You're thinking like a student of the peaceful solution. And that gives them more encouragement to want to put those things into practice more and more and more. And then eventually they're going to be thinking about these things on their own and also reminding their peers and guiding their peers and being an example to their peers and so forth, right? So that's the STOP acronym there. Stop and consider what's causing the conflict. Think about what you can do to resolve the conflict. O, what are the options to resolve or to solve the conflict peacefully? And P, proceed to carry out the right option to solve the conflict. And that's something that, it can be definitely, I know Chris mentioned it, William has too, I'm pretty sure. I think all the teachers, David as well. When we look at these things on a grander scale, and we look at it on a national scale, and we can all look and see what's taking place throughout the world, with the conflicts in Iran and Israel and various places, that first off, when they come together for talks, it needs to be, I think they use the word bilateral, that it's a benefit in both ways, right? It needs to be something that's beneficial for both parties, okay? Not just one party has all the advantages, but both people. And it needs to be fair, right? It needs to be fair to both people involved or both nations involved. And then after that, both sides need to apply what they agreed on and stick with their agreements. If they would stick with their agreements, then they can actually get somewhere. But because they don't, and they constantly break their agreements all the time, what do they end up doing? Going back to war. Okay, now we're going to have some more talks. We're going to have some more talks. And it's back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, right? And meantime, everybody else is paying, $5, $6 a gallon for gas because people can't stick to their apply what they've agreed to and find a true peaceful resolution to the conflicts that are taking place on the national scale. See, this is why if we can, it's a kind of like a grassroots effort, but take a generation of young people, 10, not too young, not too old either, and get these concepts in their mind and train them and get them to the point where they value this way of life, a peaceful, moral, rule-abiding way of life, honest, trustworthy, who practices self-control, who are young men and young women of integrity. We can actually raise up a generation of young men and women who will, when they slip into these offices of being leaders, who could actually change the world. Change the world and truly make it a better place, a more peaceful place. We would start seeing prices go down. The things that we're paying for just to survive. I'm talking about basic food, clothing, shelter. It wouldn't be astronomical anymore. Everybody would be able to afford the basic cost of living without having to struggle. We would see things like welfare and all these other, government-dependent programs start to decrease, and except for maybe where it's absolutely necessary, somebody might have a handicap and they can't do certain things, you know, because people would, have the mindset of working and taking care of themselves and taking care of their responsibilities. We wouldn't see, the fatherless homes and the unwed mothers and things of that nature. All the problems we see facing society, all the way to, the diseases and the STDs, and I was just listening to a report not that long ago where, where we did we I don't know if we heard that on the news or not, but they were saying that more people, young men and women, are entering college with a very low literacy level. Very low literacy, like elementary literacy level. And teachers from some prestigious universities are downgrading the quality of their lessons. They're saying they're having to spend more time reading to the students because they don't know how to read. It's like we've just totally lowered the requirements of education in this nation, and it's going to create a greater conflict internationally if we don't do something to turn it around. But that's the goal here of the peaceful solution. To put these values, you have to educate people, of course. Yes, you have to educate them. They're just going to do it on their own, right? You have to educate people, help them to develop the value. They have to see the value for it in themselves, right? They will do it if you teach them. Children will do things to please their teachers, to please their parents, and so forth. But at a certain point, they have to, it has to click into autopilot, so to speak. And then once they start to value it, then they take it and they run with it. And it becomes a part of them. And they make it a part of every integral decision, every action, every choice, whatever goal that they have, it becomes a part of everything in their life, right? And that's what we're wanting to do, one person at a time, of course, but eventually it'll grow from there. Not too big of a job. It is a big job, but it's not too big or an impossible job for us to do. All right, so then lastly there, the last paragraph in Procedure 6, it says, explain to students that conflicts, they're a normal part of life. You're going to have conflicts, even amongst two people who are practicing the peaceful solution. You're going to, right? You have different personalities. We have different levels in our growth of our character, in the development of our character. Different understandings or perceptions of how one might see something or understand something. And as a result, you're going to have conflicts from time to time. It's a normal part of life, right? And conflicts can arise during our everyday interaction with others. But it is important to control our emotions. A conflict is not an excuse to browbeat, to bully, to insult, to be a tyrant, either with your words or with your fist or with your car or whatever. We read some examples of that too, the mother with her daughter ran over her husband, because she was upset. Her emotions took over her, and she responded in a negative way with her daughter right there in the car. But that is no excuse to respond in an inappropriate or disrespectful way towards someone else. So it's important to control our emotions and think about the right way to handle problems. You can use right and peaceful interchangeably there. Okay? Think about the right way to handle problems. Think about a peaceful way to handle problems. Because the right way and the peaceful way are both ways that will not bring harm to yourself, others, or the environment. Okay, so let's look down here to procedure number 7 here on page 192. And then we have an activity, number 1, which is going to be here on page 193. It's poem, The Battle Within. And we will play the poem on page 105, which is in their student's handbook, and 193 in our teacher's manual. And have students list the do's that demonstrate, um, sorry, have students list the do's that demonstrate ways that self control is shown and the don'ts that show a lack of self control. All right. So let me see here real quick. I just want to check something out. Okay. Oh, you know what? I didn't even ask about that. Do we have that where we could play that Battle Within poem? I forgot. I didn't even see that earlier. If we don't, I can read it. I don't want to put a burden on my sound room. The sound room. Okay, okay. We'll go ahead and play that then. That poem there.
The battle within. This time, I've had enough. It's time for me to prove that I'm tough. Calling me names is not a game. Those names hurt and make me feel ashamed. No longer will they laugh at me. I'll put an end to this, you'll see. I'll push and shove him to the floor. Then he won't bother me anymore. This will gain respect for me and put an end to my misery. Wait, my friend, were you not told the way to practice self-control? Fighting back is never right. It only creates bigger fights. Stop and think of how he'll respond when you push and shove him to the ground. He will not simply walk away. He'll come back to fight another day. If respect is what you hope to gain, it will not come from causing pain. Instead, speak to someone in authority. They may have advice. You will see. Use self-control. That's what I say. The peaceful solution is the only way.
All right. Thank you. All right. So in there, we have several examples of some things, with the conflict. It's a battle with it. You can see this was something that in this poem that a student was kind of dealing with these thoughts, turning these thoughts over in their mind and thinking about some of the ways that they could potentially respond. All right. So some of the things um, that they were thinking about doing, right, was pushing and shoving. That was one of the responses, which obviously would fall into, as we covered here, a don't, right? A don't do, which would show a lack of self-control. And, their goal was to push him or shove him to the floor in hopes that he wouldn't bother them anymore. But like the poem said, no, he's just going to fight back. He's just going to come back a little bit later. And we see this on larger scales. You see this in nations, right? One nation will fight with another nation, and then they might be beat, but they regain strength, they gain allies, and then they'll come back, right? You might have won the battle, but you did not win the war, as it is said sometimes. But you see this on a smaller scale as well. People get strength. They think, well, I'll go to the gym and I'll work out, or I'll learn karate or jujitsu or something like that. Then I'll come back and I'll deal with this person. And like we see here, it can create bigger fights. And then, just real quick here, some of the do's that the student will want to do is, of course, speak to someone in authority, right? Speak to someone in authority. That's one of the things that I always try to remind students, that if you're dealing with the conflict and you don't know how, you're so frustrated, you don't know how to deal with it in a peaceful way, you at least know what's right and what's wrong, what's peaceful and what's not peaceful, what leads to peace and what leads to war. If you don't know how to deal with it, go to an authority. Seek out an authority, right? oh, I'm really upset about this. This person said this and they did this to me, or they keep doing this, and I told them to stop. How do I need to handle it? What should I do? And then let them help you, let them guide you, but don't make an impulsive decision because you'll end up regretting it, right? Not considering those consequences. People do this on a daily basis. They don't consider the consequences and they end up regretting it. And then also here, using self-control is what should be done in order to bring about a peaceful solution. Okay, so that's page 193. Let's look at procedure 8 here. It says activity 2, compare and contrast. Have students turn to page 106 of their workbooks, and 194 of the teacher's manual, and read the chart and answer the questions that follow. Okay, so we have here on page 194, activity 2, compare and contrast, answer key. Read the chart and answer the questions that follow. Let's see here. Okay, so in this chart here we have one, two, five points here. It shows emotions, and then you have what a wrong choice would be or what a right choice would be, right? And then if you look down here at the bottom, it says here questions and answers. Let's see here. Okay. All right, let's look at the emotions here real quick. Go back up to the chart. So number 1, we have anger, which is emotional. So what we see here on this left side here are these emotions that could potentially arise because of a conflict, okay? And so the wrong choice for number 1 would be showing rage. Remember what rage is? Uncontrolled anger, right? Uncontrolled anger. A right choice would be stay in control, okay? That would be a contrast, right? Number 2, if you had anger, wrong choice would be hit others, where the right choice would be keep your hands to yourself. Number 3, if you were hurt, you could respond with a wrong choice by insulting or calling names. Or you can make a right choice and just simply do not retaliate. Sometimes people don't realize that being quiet is also an option. You don't always have to say something. You don't have to defend yourself or defend your honor by saying something that's slicker or smarter than the other person. Sometimes silence is enough, right? You can turn and walk away. Number 4, upset or disappointment as the emotion. The wrong choice would be scream and argue. Never really get far with that. I've seen people get into screaming matches. I've seen children get into screaming matches, and then I ask them at the end, well, what did you accomplish? Right? Now your throat's all raw. Your pulse is all, high. You're sweating. You're angry. Your eyes are all red and glassy. It looks like you're just upset with the world now. You didn't accomplish anything. Now, they could have made the right choice and just stay calm and use a calm voice. And that is actually what a lot of law enforcements are trained to do to de-escalate a situation where somebody's screaming and yelling and flying off the handle. They're taught to use a lower volume in their voice because it causes the person to want to quiet down to listen to them, if they're not hopped up on something, right? And it's a de-escalation tactic, right? And you can do this just in even dealing with siblings. And then number 5 here, anger, again, the wrong choice would be to damage someone's property, and the right choice would be, again, do not retaliate. And then finally here, jealousy would be emotion, and the wrong choice would be slander And the right choice would be remain quiet and work out the problem. Sometimes when you really try to work out these problems, people don't really like it, but sometimes they sometimes see that they are the problem. It's not the other person or the other situation. They come to the understanding that, okay, really nobody really did anything to me to cause a problem. This is a problem I've made up in my mind. Well, working through these things and understanding how to practice self-control, we can actually resolve our own internal problems, our own internal affairs, right? And find a peaceful resolution and how to deal with them. And then sometimes, again, like I said before, it's just going to an authority, explaining what the conflict is, and asking what's a proper way to deal with this in peacefully. One in which doesn't bring harm to myself, others, or the environment or property. Okay, so we're going to stop right there, and we'll pick up back here on. I guess we'll wrap up page 194. Next class. Our next class is going to be this coming Wednesday, which is going to be the 19th at 5:30 p.m. Central Standard Time. Again, we do thank you all for joining us this evening. We look forward to seeing you at the next class. Have a wonderful evening.